Hello and welcome back to Make It Stick. Jump into Anki to start it out. What do we got? 6 flashcards. Let's go. 7 actually. What is fluency and why is it deceptive in learning? Fluency is essentially the ease of processing information mentally. It's deceptive in learning because it's often mistaken for mastery when it often isn't. Cool. What is the main idea of Chapter 5 of Avoid Illusions to Knowing in one sentence? It's a fast sentence, but here we go. Objectively, being able to understand one's own level of skill and one's weaknesses. That is also what one knows and what one doesn't know. This is critical for continuous learning and improvement. However, this objective understanding is easily led astray via cognitive biases, faulty narratives, memory distortions, and illusions, as well as common study techniques. Good. What is a common myth about learning that Chapter 1 refutes, and what is the actual truth? Chapter 1 refutes that. What does it refute? Learning is an acquired skill, but it doesn't refute that. What is the actual truth? Common myth about learning that Chapter 1 refutes. What is the actual truth? The common myth is that learning that feels easy is actually good and effective. It actually refutes that. The actual truth is that learning that is strenuous, effortful, effortful is a really good word for it. That is what leads to good learning, effective, deep learning. Myth, learning is best when it's easy and feels fluent. Truth, learning that feels effortful is more durable and effective. We'll say good on that. What are the 6 sections of Chapter 6 Get Beyond Learning Styles? This is new. Active learning from the get-go. Dynamic testing, the takeaway. There's 3 I can get right there. What else we got? Active learning from the get-go, good. Successful intelligence, dynamic testing, structure building, rule versus example learning, the takeaway. Okay, we got 3 of the 6. Not horrible. All right. Hard. What is an illusion of knowing? An illusion of knowing is a false sense of mastery, often stemming from feelings of fluency or familiarity. Cool. What are 7 tools / habits for calibrating your judgment? Testing and retrieval. Peer instruction. Pay attention to what cues you're using to evaluate how well you're learning or if you're learning. Corrective feedback / peer feedback. Apprenticeships and teams. Simulations. Mistakes you actually make. Mistakes in the actual field that you make during actual experience, hands-on experience. Good. What are the 2 systems of knowing according to Kahneman? We got system 1 and system 2. System 1 is automatic, it's intuitive, it's fast. This is also very susceptible to biases, cognitive biases and illusions. System 2, much more deliberate, reasoning, rational, slower. Actually can train system 1. Cool. Good. What are the 6 sections of Chapter 6 Get Beyond Learning Styles? Active learning from the get-go. Successful intelligence, dynamic testing. Structure building. Example learning. What was this? Something example learning versus example learning. Teaching versus example learning. The takeaway. Rule versus example learning. Everything else is good. Okay, one more time. What are the 6 sections of Chapter 6 Get Beyond Learning Styles? Active learning from the get-go, successful intelligence, dynamic testing, structure building, rule versus example learning, the takeaway. There we go. It's kind of mass practice, but hey, that's what Anki does in the beginning. All right. So what did we read about yesterday? Well, we started reading chapter 6, Avoid Illusions Knowing. We read through the introduction. Introduction on a few important points. First of all, the traditional idea of learning styles, the traditional view is that people have different learning styles, and these learning styles basically are how our brain receives and processes information. Some people receive and process information better via auditory information or visual information or hands-on, kinesthetic, tactile information, or verbal language information. I'm sure there's others. And that sticking, okay. And that since for learning, if you stick with or you use a resource that is in line with your preferred learning style, that's an advantage. You'll learn better and quicker. If you use a different medium, different resource that's not in line with your particular learning style, that's going to be a disadvantage for learning, slower, worse learning. That's the traditional view. Now, the authors of this book are going to argue in this chapter that people do have learning preferences. They do. However, sticking with one's preferred learning style does not improve learning, or doesn't seem to be supported by evidence to do so. However, there are differences in learning, and some of them do matter and are important for how well one learns, which I'm interested to see what those will be. How about we even actually ask a question? Last chapter, we didn't end up writing any questions, so let's write one down. What are the differences in learning that do matter, according to the authors? That is, differences in learning styles, differences in learning differences in how one learns that affects learning outcomes. Okay. Surely that's okay for now. Now, we finished that introduction, and then we started reading the first section, which is active learning from the get-go. We are learning about the story, the character of this chapter, who was a guy born in 1940, Henry or something. David Hendry. Hendry, I think is his last name, but I can't remember his first name. This kid started, hustling from a young age, wanted to be rich, American, self-made, started doing all these things as a kid, learning, from active kind of generation, learning as he goes through selling things, flipping things, paperboy route, starts selling fireworks that are illegal, but learns supply and demand, high demand, low supply. You can make a lot of money with these fireworks. And just a very stubborn, hard-headed, determined kid. So Bruce Henry. All right, so we're going to keep reading now, and I will be back in a bit. All right, so continuing with the story of Bruce Henry of this chapter, he ends up being able to purchase a piece of land, and he ends up building the entire house basically by himself, and with the help of friends, and learning from people around him, asking questions to other people that know him or he knows, and eventually having an electrician actually fix his wiring and stuff. But he basically built this house himself, and then he took the how sold the house after 4 summers of work, and then flipped it into basically a mortgage for a fourplex. And he's like, well, 4 checks a month. And then he realizes after some time that it takes a lot of effort, all these problems with the tenants, trying to find tenants leave, managing it is a lot of work. And so then he basically he sells it and is like, I'm done with real estate, it doesn't work. See, this is all about, before I get to this actually, they mention in one of these paragraphs 2 of the differences that do matter for learning outcomes. And first is like the propensity of self-learning and taking responsibility for your education and knowledge and learning. That's the first difference. That's what we see here with Bruce Hendry. The second difference is basically this thing that psychologists call rule building or rule learning or structure building. Right? These are 2 of these chapters as subsections. Sections of this chapter essentially. Rule building slash rule learning slash structure learning, as far as my understanding is they're kind of similar things, and they refer to when someone learns, they kind of like, when they experience something, they extract the valuable information and the patterns, and they kind of construct rules or intuit rules and lessons from their experiences rather than just face value experience, taking the experience at face value. And this is rule learning slash structure building. This is another difference that leads to differences in learning outcomes. Rule learning and structure building leads to better learning outcomes than taking experience as face value. Okay, so back to the Bruce Hendry with the fourplex, sells it. He's in college, he graduates, he becomes a salesman for Kodak. Okay, so he's making more money eventually than his branch manager because he's one of the top salesmen. And he realizes, okay, here's another lesson or another rule. Being like a salesman or a rainmaker, bringing in the money is more valuable than being a manager. Okay? Then he quits that job and goes to work for selling stocks. Then he realizes when he's selling stocks, okay, half of this is going to the IRS and the commission, half of it's going to the company. If I really want to make a lot of money from stocks, I need to be investing myself. Then he ends up losing a ton of money investing in stocks. Realizes another rule. It's much easier to lose money than it is to gain. There's no limit to the downside of stocks, because if stock goes down 50%, you have to go 100% up. Right? Now, I'm not saying all of these lessons are correct, but this is just what the book's saying. He's rule building from all these experiences, these learning lessons that he's taking away. Can it lead to flawed and incorrect rules and lessons? I think so, but we'll continue with the story. Eventually, he hears about this guy that's in his area that talks and gives advice, goes from brokerage to brokerage, just doing deals and giving advice. And he basically, his name is Sam Lepa, and this guy tells Bruce one time, like, yeah, buy this stock. They're selling our bonds. They're selling these bonds for 20 cents, 2 cents on the dollar, and that there's like 22 cents in back interest. So as soon as the company becomes unbankrupt because it was in financial distress, that 22 cents will be paid right back. So it's basically free, and you get a bond. And he was like, okay, and didn't buy any, but he watched Sam Lepa do it, and it turned out exactly as he said. So he's like, oh, okay, let me talk to this guy some more. And he asked to talk to him more and learn what he's doing. And basically this guy was like a bonds, almost like arbitrager, probably in the 80s, late 70s or 80s. Bond arbitrager essentially is what I think they didn't use those terms, but he would find companies that were in distress and basically calculate the value of the assets of the company and see if there's a deal to be made where versus the price of like the junior bonds, because the senior bonds are what's one of the lessons or frameworks Sam Lepa worked on was basically who gets paid first when a company is in distress. It's not the shareholders or owners, it's actually the creditors. And there's the bonds, you're a creditor if you're a bond owner or holder, and these bonds, they have seniority. So the senior bonds get paid out first, and then leftovers go to junior bonds. That's the order of payouts when the company's kind of failing. And so these junior bond salesmen or junior bond holders often, because of fear, ignorance, and laziness, undervalue their junior bonds because they just think the company's not going to be able to pay them back, so they try and get rid of them, which drives the price down. But if you can calculate the price of the value of the assets and the price of the bonds, you do this work, you can see like, oh, there's literally no way to lose money here. Let me buy this. Or, not literally, but very low risk investments. And this is exactly what Bruce Henry had been looking for, his whole life, was like how to make money, how to understand it, how to get rich, really. He tried a bunch of different things and had some success, moderate success, and then failures. But this all primed him to know that this is a great opportunity and to keep seeking out opportunities like this. So, okay. We're going to continue the story with Bruce Henry tomorrow. But we are now well over halfway done with the book, so I'm very happy with that. The book has 253 pages. We're on 137, so I will talk to you guys later. See you.